everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is Sip and Tea with Nat and Z. I am Nat.
And I am Z. Hello, hello.
Hola. What's
We
going
have a lot.
on?
Hey, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
This is take 2. We started recording and the system just said no.
Yeah.
F your recording,
Right.
and start over.
Like your
so
couch.
This is take 2. Yeah. Eric James us.
Right. It totally did. Bogarted us. So.
Yes. But since we have a lot to get through today, we're going to go straight to the tea of the day. We are not tea experts. Talk to your doctor, yada, yada, yada. Don't substitute for medication. Not affiliated with any of these companies.
Right.
So what is the tea on the table?
So the tea on the table correlates with the topic, which is vulnerability, because it is called Aveda Comforting Tea Bags. So obviously when we're vulnerable, we would like to be comforted in some way. So they're soothing tea bags. They're certified organic, caffeine-free, herbal infusion with licorice root and peppermint. I'm not really too fond of licorice root, but
Neither am I.
sometimes it can be a nice combination with the right amount
Mhm.
of sweetness. So,
Mhm.
but it's, licorice and peppermint, it calms your senses, promoting a sense of well-being. You can steep yourself in comfort whenever, like what Z talked about a couple weeks ago about the traveling tea kit. So this would be a tea to take with you. So that you can have your nice little zen area wherever you may go. It's 100% certified organic, and you can drink it hot or ice, and it's in cute little convenient tea bags. So check it out, Aveda Comforting Tea Bags.
Delicious. Like you said, I'm not a big fan of licorice root,
Yeah.
but if you mix it right, it can give you what you need.
Yes,
It can
completely.
give you what you need.
Yes.
So generally at this stage in the episode, we get into the hot tea. So
Right.
I have no hot tea, and there's a couple reasons why I don't have any hot tea. One, I haven't really been on social media, and that is in two parts. One, I
Mhm.
haven't really been on social media because a really bad storm came through. It
Mhm.
was a tornado.
Yeah.
Just put out
A
there
touchdown.
80 plus, yes, miles an hour. Wind. It uprooted a tree out back.
Mhm.
It knocked a tree down in front of my building. There's still a tree branch on one of my husband's cars.
Mhm.
They still have not come to take down.
Yeah, we were out of
Actually,
yeah,
you were out of power for how long? We were
a
out
couple
for 48
days.
hours. Yeah.
A couple days.
Mikey, I think, was out the longest.
Yeah.
Hers just came back.
Just came back on. But they got a lot of
And
trees over there too.
They do. There's a lot of implications with this because the communities that were deeply affected, but then also took a long time for them to clean up, have been predominantly African American communities in this area. And so I'm just,
Yeah.
and again, we live in PG County, even though we are now supposedly number 2 in the wealth category when it comes to.
I think that's relative though, because you think about how much it costs to live here. We still have more buying power to purchase homes as expensive as they are. It's just the money goes further in the other counties because it's cheaper to buy the same house that we would buy here. So is it really the wealthiest? I don't think so. But it's all relative.
And relative in speaking, and relative in now that they are saying that the markets that are most vulnerable are the markets now with predominantly African Americans in their communities, which is now Charles County all of a sudden, when Charles County was never a vulnerable county.
Exactly.
But it seems like as soon as they have earmarked Charles County as being the premier destination for upper class black people, now it is the most vulnerable area. And there's truth and there's truth and falseness in it, right? There is truth in it because we know that there are predatory lenders and they tend to come after people of color the most. And so there may be some people who are in over their heads with their homes, even though after the housing market crashed in 2007, that should have stopped, but we know it doesn't. But then also it's false because it's just like now you're saying just because there's black people living there that makes it a very vulnerable community to be in. And PG has never you could call PG a vulnerable county, but PG has always had steady growth.
Always
have been here.
Always.
So it's it's PG County, Charles County, and Baltimore County, which again all predominantly
black
African American community.
But you also got to think about how the proximity to DC for PG County is now a suburb of DC for certain individuals trying to grow out.
That is correct. Those are facts. You're right. But that's a little off topic because I'm trying to explain to you why there's no hot tea.
Right.
We got into, and we're into the real estate of it.
Right.
But, so that's part, right? Because I just have been trying to figure out for the last couple of days how we were going to just thrive, because I've had 4-year-old walking around with a flashlight for days talking about something. I'm trying to figure out what the problem is, and I just need her to sit down because it's too damn hot in this house for me to be walking around with a goddamn flashlight talking about something. I'm gonna figure out what the problem is.
Okay, Pepco. My niece is my niece works for Pepco.
All right, BG&E. All right, and to top it off, there was a hard hat that she had from a birthday party that she found in her toy chest, took it out and put it on. Sis was prepared to get us our power back, okay? She was.
Go ahead, Charlie.
So that's the first part. The second part of there not being hot tea is that I have to take care of my mental health. And the hot tea requires me to go onto social media on sites that I don't like to particularly be on, number one. And I don't particularly like to be on social media, period, during this time because it's just too much negativity.
Right.
And it's just a lot. It's a lot.
There is a lot going on.
As someone who has been clinically diagnosed, this is not something that I diagnosed myself.
Right.
Someone who has been clinically diagnosed with having high functioning depression, I have to understand what triggers me and kind of realize that quickly and kind of fall back. Because if I don't, things start to look really bad.
Right.
And I started to see patterns that happen when that depression starts to really kick in. I'm not as I really don't care. And this sounds very superficial and very surface, but it makes sense. I don't really care how my appearance is. I'm not really big on cleaning and doing things. But then I get not sad in that, but then I get frustrated in that, and then I overdo it, right? So then I'm overly compensating because I don't want you to see that there is something going on. That's where the high functioning comes in. So I'm like, no.
So you overcompensate.
No. Exactly. And I started to see that. And I'm starting to be a lot more social because I'm not. And I'm putting myself out there more, and I don't like to. All to kind of keep this facade going that isn't real, if that makes sense.
It does.
And so I have to kind of just step back from social media for a while. And I know everybody's going to be so upset. We don't get gossip, but I understand it's a very trivial aspect of this, but this is also a good way for me to talk about, to lean into what the topic is, which is vulnerability.
Yes.
I'm showing you my I'm being very vulnerable in this moment and saying that I do suffer from it. And there are moments in my life that I really have to kind of do the work, even when I don't want to. When it's hard and when it's challenging and when there's other stuff going on. And it tends to manifest itself a lot when there are other external things going on that I can't control.
Right.
And that started to happen. And I said, you have to kind of figure out how to back away from a lot of these things. And that's what I did. So
I think that was a good hot tea, so to speak, because it makes sense, because you can't have hot tea all the time, because those are triggers, those are images, those are situations that you're filtering under your own situation where you may be. And those, granted, of course we love the hot tea, but the hot tea doesn't affect us directly if we don't do it. But if we see it too much, it does affect us directly because of the negative. A lot of times hot tea is kind of negative. So, you need to protect yourself as best as possible.
Pretty much And that's pretty much what I've been trying to do, just protect myself, because it got to a point where I woke up every morning just laying in bed looking at the ceiling like, what fuckery is going on today?
Right.
Like,
I mean, that's easy to do today too. Good Lord.
Yeah. And I had to mute a lot of stuff because it's just like, I don't want to hear about the Supreme Court. I don't want to hear, and if friends start talking about it, I had to kind of
I can't move yourself out.
I'm sorry. I understand that this is frustrating for you, but I cannot take that energy on for myself right now. It's just too, I can't. Yeah. If we can't talk about, and I know it's hard for some people, like, you don't want to talk about the good. I can't sit and talk to you about the bad.
Right.
Because the bad affects me profoundly.
Right.
And it does something to me that is not healthy for me. Mm-hmm. And I have to kind of step away. And it's like, again, it's like the smallest things in social media where we're talking about people being negative, like, to, like, people's children are off limits.
Right.
Why are we still having conversations about people's children? Like, yes. Like, it's just a lot. It's just a lot. It's just a lot.
Crazy place, and people are in different spaces, and the boundaries that are being crossed that are causing other negative fallout is like profound these days.
It is.
And it's just overwhelming. It can be overwhelming.
It's very overwhelming. And I realized, so I remember having this conversation with my therapist about empathy and how I was like, I'm not empathetic. And she's like, but you are. Empathy is not linear. Like, well, not linear. I say, empathy is not a monolith in the sense that it looks exactly the same way for everybody. Correct. Like, your empathy can come into play in other ways. And the fact that I feel so deeply about certain things, that is where my empathy shows. But it's so much that it overwhelms. Right. Like, I just can't. Yeah. It's just too much. And it's hard to explain to people who don't suffer from anxiety and depression what that looks like and what that feels like. And it's hard because some people are like, it just sounds like weakness. It just sounds like,
just soft.
Someone who's just not able to handle emotions very well.
Very true.
If you meet me, you understand. I have and my husband has said this to me at times, and I feel bad for this, but I can be very cold at times and very business-like. But I understand that is a mechanism of protection and defense for me, right? So I know I'm not a weak person,
right?
And even though it's okay to have some weaknesses and to be weak and to be vulnerable,
right? Exactly.
So it's easier for me to talk about these things now. If you had talked to me maybe 3 years ago, I wouldn't want anybody to know that I've suffered from depression or anxiety, because it would be like, why do you need to know that? Like, it's a hush-hush thing. Like, I don't want anybody to look at me like I'm crazy or like there's something. But I feel like there's power in exposing the fact that I can look like I have everything going on, and I really don't. A lot of times,
and it's okay.
Really don't. And it's okay.
And it's okay. And I think that's like the big part that people don't realize. It is okay to not be okay.
It is. It is okay to not be okay. And I don't define myself by that. You know what I mean? I'm so much more than depression and anxiety, but it is a part of who I am, and it is definitely something that I have to acknowledge and be mindful of as I go through my day to day, and I've been able to talk about these things more because I've had a good group of friends who never judge me by me telling them this. Also, because I noticed that a lot of y'all got issues.
Yeah, buddy. I'm telling you, a lot of us got our own shit with us.
I mean, everybody in the crew, I think, has some level of anxiety and understand when we're talking about mental health, it isn't just in the form of depression and anxiety.
Right.
There are a lot of other facets of mental health that a lot of people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis that we don't acknowledge or we don't acknowledge as mental health.
Right.
Like, if you're self-deprecating,
that is huge. That is a big one.
A big one. If you are a constant people pleaser,
that's a big one.
That's a big one. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of things that we need to work through. It shows up. So I just say, for those of you who, you know, kind of can see yourself in me in a little bit in terms of the things that I'm talking about, just be easy with yourself, be gentle with yourself, be kind with yourself.
Give yourself grace.
I follow this podcast, and I haven't listened to it in a long time. And mainly I haven't listened to it because I was told when you're doing a podcast, you kind of don't want to listen to other podcasts because you don't want their ideas and their conversations and things to kind of bleed into what it is that you're doing. You want to be as authentic and as possible. And sometimes when you're in a realm, it's not to say that you can't listen to anything, but you just have to kind of filter it out because you don't want to start to become the second-rate version of something that you've seen or
don't want to be a knockoff.
No. And so I was listening to this podcast because I haven't seen the episodes drop in a while. And I was like, well, what happened? And so I go to look, and one of the hosts of the show broke down crying in the last, maybe, I would say 5 minutes of the show to say that he was dealing with some very serious mental health issues and he needed to walk away from the podcast for a while. Like it was life or death. His therapist told him, you're starting to do things that are you're starting to self-harm.
Right.
And you are at a place right now where it's life or death.
Yeah.
And you have to figure it out.
Yeah.
And he had to walk away for a while. And the listeners were very understanding and was like, take all the time you need. We'll be here.
Right.
And if you never come back, it was a good run.
Right.
And I thought about that, and I'm like, wow, like there are people out here that are really struggling.
Man.
And we're trying to find our footing.
Whew.
And it seems like as soon as you do, some shit just comes and knocks you off.
Sometimes it's never ending. I was just telling Z about some stuff before we got on, and it's very real because it's just like one thing after another, after another, after another. And how do you keep your head above water? How do you keep your mental where it needs to be, even though you may need to indulge in those feelings for a little bit, but pull yourself back because, you don't want to go down a rabbit hole. But if you keep fighting them, then that's just as detrimental as ignoring it. I mean, as stepping into it fully. But it's a balancing act when you don't know if you can balance.
Right. And then you have family that you have to take care of, and then you have other people that are dependent on you. Then it really becomes challenging to kind of deal with things in the capacity that you need to deal with them.
Right.
A friend of ours, and I'll tell you who after, is going through a breakup, right? And I remember them telling me a while ago that they were thinking about ending the relationship, right? They're not married, but they were in a very long-term situation. And the person that they were breaking up with is a very good person. And, just across the board, just, they're that's a good person. Right. But it was like, I'm not fully happy. I don't feel the joy. There's just a lot of things that aren't clicking in this.
Right.
And having the conversation with other people, they were, being told, well, he's, this person's a good person and, it could be worse. It could be this and this and that. And I when I was talking to him, I said, but it could be better.
Right.
We always say that, right? And we talk about this with toxic positivity.
Yes.
It could be worse, but it could be better. And just because things are average or mediocre or safe, or you're just
in your comfort zone,
you're comfortable, doesn't mean that you have to stay there.
Right.
You know what I mean? Sometimes we get, I don't want to say bullied because it's not bullied, but sometimes we get emotionally bullied into staying into situations.
Yeah.
Just because they're comfortable and they're safe.
Yeah. I think we all do it.
And and it's hard because I knew in that moment that person was being very vulnerable and sharing this information with me, and then fast forward, them actually breaking up with the individual and the situation, the circumstances that surrounded that breakup, and to see them just being able to, and this person is is a very highly positive person. I don't ever I love the fact that this person is in my life because of how highly positive they are. And even the most positive people are going to have moments where it is a struggle to figure out what is next.
Yes.
So and I mean this, like, this is probably one of the most positive people I've ever met in my entire life. I don't think I've met anybody who can take a situation and look at it and through a lens of positivity and the way that this individual can, and to even see just a small, I don't know what the fuck is gonna happen next. And to understand that they are processing that, and they understand that everything isn't right now, and I have to just take it moment by moment,
second by second.
That was like a wake up call for me as well, because it's like, even in your best, Zarifa, you still are gonna have some challenges, and it's okay.
Yeah, got to give yourself grace.
Right now is okay. Give it grace. Give it time.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to put that out there, so just know there probably isn't going to be a lot of hot tea from me and then the other part of that is, like, we drop these so far down the line that the stuff we're talking about is going to be stale anyway. And then it's like, y'all, we're talking about something and we could be saying, oh, the president, and then 2 weeks later he ain't the president no more.
Right.
So it's just like, we're trying to give you stuff that's relevant and timely, but also understand that we are also working with our own physical and mental, emotional challenges,
and then some,
and sometimes it's not going to be there. Right. So with that, let's take a quick break, and we'll come right back and talk about the topic of the day. And we are back.
All right. So, as you all can tell and have experienced, we are talking about vulnerability today. So I know a lot of times folks, when they hear vulnerability, they cringe and they're like, oh my goodness. Like what Z was saying earlier, like, oh, you're being, a little bit too open. You're being vulnerable. You feel like folks are in your business. And the very thought of being more vulnerable nauseates you. Some people think it's like holding hands, singing Kumbaya, and then crying about how your best friend doesn't love you, or like you love him, or whatever. Like some people, that's their vision of it is. But in reality, vulnerability is consciously choosing not to hide your emotions or desires from others. And the key to true vulnerability is that you're willing to accept the consequences no matter what. So you put yourself out there. You're on Front Street, and you don't really care what the blowback, if there's going to be blowback, if there's going to be judgment. You don't care. You're like, this is it. Here I am. Take it or leave it, and keep it moving. And unfortunately, a lot of us weren't taught to express our emotions freely. For whatever reason, maybe our home, our culture, childhood trauma, our parents didn't know how to do it, so then they just pass it on to us. And they were never taught how to express their emotions, so then they couldn't teach us to express our emotions. And then those things become habitual, and they're just part of us as time goes on. Whether it doesn't make it right, it's just we're doing what we know. And, we're more inclined for some folks to keep stuff bottled up because of the fear of judgment, So with that being said, what does vulnerability really look like? It can be as simple as complimenting someone on how good they look, and you don't know them. I've done this before. That I'm like, oh, you're so pretty. I love your outfit, but also making sure you have clear boundaries with someone can also be vulnerable, showing how you're vulnerable. Like, this is what I need right now, and I don't need this. So I need this space to be vulnerable and free for what I need to do. But communicating that to someone, what your boundaries are, can be a very vulnerable place, as well as expressing, your undying love for someone, short of stalking, of course, but being mindful that those are some things that you can do. And just giving your opinions and talking about how you're feeling when your head is at, regardless of what other people may think, and not doing it in a condescending or sarcastic FU type of way. Just literally being free with what your thoughts are and say, well, this is how I feel about it. Y'all can take it or leave it, but not in a, well, how could y'all think that when it should be this, in a judgmental way? It's very different. And putting yourself in a position where you can be rejected. This one, I think, is where most people go to when they think about being vulnerable. They put myself out there. I'm not going to put myself out there and get rejected. And, saying a joke that may not be that funny, but you're still going to put it out there. Let's say it's a dad joke. You know it ain't funny, but you're going to tell it anyway. And hope people laugh. And then if they don't, you're like, oh, well. And then asserting yourself and with opinions that may offend others. But then you got to think about, some people just seek to be offended. And we talked about that in one of our other shows. Some people they're looking for something to be offended by, regardless of the intent. And even though the impact of it, they take the impact to a whole other level. And, and then, just telling someone you're attracted to them without thinking that there's anything going to come of it. I've definitely done that. I'm like, excuse me, sir, you're fine. Have a good day.
Now I don't think I've ever.
Yeah, I've done that.
But when you're bringing this up, it reminds me of something I just watched. So Kevin Hart has a talk show. It's called Heart to Heart. It's on Peacock. And I watched the first 2 episodes, and one was with Pete Davidson and the other one was with Jay-Z. And Jay-Z was talking about this time where he was in this club, and this was like back in the day. This is like before, I think Jay-Z was like, he was famous, but he wasn't like stadium. He said it was a time where you were in the club, and after you performed, you just hung out in the club. Those days are over. That doesn't happen anymore. So how long ago this was. This would be like if he was at Love or Dream, and he was performing and then just went into the VIP section,
yeah, that stuff don't happen anymore.
They don't happen anymore. So he was talking about how he was standing there, and this guy came up to him, was walking up to him. He said this guy had this mean mug on his face, and had this big scar across his face, and was just walking up to him. And he's like, I'm admitting this on national television. He was like, I was a little shook because he was like, yo, what was he about to do? So he said in that moment, this guy got closer. He was like, what's up? He's like, how's, like, something to the fact like, how's it going? What's going on? And he said the guy just had this like big, just like smile, like, and he's like, it was one of those like really nice smiles. His teeth was all white. And he just like, and he's like, yo, he's like, can I get this autograph? Cause my daughter really loves you. And he gave him the autograph. And he was saying in that moment, Jay-Z being vulnerable and letting his defenses down, right? Because he's thinking this dude is on some, I'm a whoop his ass.
Right.
And he's like, the guy is coming to me already. Like, I gotta come to this dude to ask him for an autograph.
Right.
And he was already on that. He's like, it could have gone a different way if Jay-Z was matching
the energy
he thought he was receiving from the guy, right?
The key word there is thought.
Thought. It's a perception, right? You think you're getting this energy from somebody, and you're not.
At all.
And then you react. It's the same thing that Method Man said.
Yo, that's right.
And I think I talked about where he said he went up to Destiny's Child at this concert that was in recognition of Janet Jackson, I think, or something, and their backs were turned to him, and he walked up to them and was like, hey ladies, and they didn't respond, and he thought they were just dissing him. So later on, when they were actually formally introduced to him somebody else, and they tried to shake his hand, he was like, get out of here, I don't do that Hollywood shit. And he said it was because he perceived that they were dissing him because they didn't turn around. And he said, in actuality, because of where they were, they probably didn't even hear
that part.
And he was like, and who is he to demand a certain level of respect? So in 2 part, he was being vulnerable by telling that story, because a lot of men don't acknowledge their wrongs and then move forward, right? And let me not even classify that. A lot of people don't admit their wrongs and then move forward. Black men just typically get the spotlight like that. And then he was being vulnerable in the sense that he was doing something that was out of his comfort zone anyway, just because of the mindset that he was in, and had already talked himself into the fact that they're probably not going to be this, and this anyway. You understand what I'm saying? So sometimes we are put in situations to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
But we self kind of prophesize that we're going to get a negative reaction, and then that gives us an out to ever be vulnerable again.
Right.
And that lends itself into the faces of vulnerability. Like we were talking about, what does it look like? Yeah, it's faces to it. Like you need to learn how to be vulnerable with yourself. You need to ask yourself, can I be vulnerable with myself? You know,
a lot of people can't or don't even know what that looks like.
They don't. Like there's an internal level of vulnerability that you need to have. And it's something that definitely takes time and patience. It's something that I've learned. Like me being able to have conversations about the things that are going on internally with me had to be something that I had to deal with myself first. I had to acknowledge it first. And I will say, when we were talking about self-prophesizing, there was a moment in time, and I've shared this story at some point before, that I was at the height of trying to figure out what was going on with me, right? And they had me, it was bad, and they put me on some medication. Not ashamed to say. And so I was on some medication to kind of help with the anxiety and the depression. And I was having this conversation with somebody, and the conversation kind of went left. And the person said, "Did you take your medicine today?" Like very flippant, right? And they were one of the few people that I had actually shared
and been vulnerable with,
that I was on medication to kind of deal with some of these things. And I had two choices in that moment. I could have used that and said, this is why I'm never going to tell anybody else anything ever again, because I was vulnerable in the moment and look at what happened. Or say, you know what, that person's just an asshole.
Yeah.
And, you know, just
keep it moving.
This is not somebody that I need to have in my space. And it was the latter that I made. The decision was, I don't need to have this person in my space in any capacity, right? Like, and I remember, you know, a while later down the line, this person tried to come back into my space, and I said, absolutely not. Like, I was like, you know what? Yeah. And then I said, no, for what purpose? Like, you've already shown me who you were. And so there's no need for me to bring you back into this space, because I already know who you are. You may portray yourself to be something else to other people, and other people may think you're a totally different person, and that's fine. But in the capacity in which I've had to deal with you, I'm good. I never have to go down that road again. But then that also has to make you vulnerable to yourself. Because you have to be able to hold yourself accountable for decisions that you've made, right? So how can you be vulnerable with yourself? You can write your younger self a letter, right? What would you want your younger self to hear from you today? You know, ask for help when you need it. Therapy. Talk to your friends. Allow safe people to know when you're upset. And this is, like I said, I realized that person was not a safe person. You have to discern who's safe and who's not. And unfortunately, everybody in your circle may not be a safe person.
And that's because of where they are.
Right.
And that's
where they are.
And you just can't, you got to know who you can tell stuff to. And it's nothing to do with like the necessary level. It does have to do with trust, but at the same time, it's, if you know where a person is at that moment, that has really nothing to do with you, and you try to open yourself up, what that person may give back is not what you need, because they're not in a place to receive and help you out.
Exactly. And you have to, and like you said, how can I put this? Just because we're saying somebody isn't safe doesn't mean they're not a good friend. It just means that maybe the space that they're in just doesn't allow you to have the safe space that you need to come to them and tell them that you are upset. And it could be for a multitude of reasons, right? Allow yourself to cry. You know, I think sometimes we are told that crying is a weakness and you shouldn't do it. I know I have been a believer in that, and like I've struggled with vulnerability for years. I think like I started to learn and understand being vulnerable like very recent, like within like honestly like the last 7 years, 7 to 8 years of my life, right? And understanding that vulnerability does not equal weakness, and that you can be vulnerable and you're not weak. And if somebody else perceives you as weak for being vulnerable, that's them projecting their shit on you. That has nothing to do with you. But sometimes crying actually allows you to connect to some raw emotions.
It's a physical release that your body doesn't need.
It is. It is. It really is. And here is the secret. here's the secret. Here's the thing that you need to understand with crying. You're not always going to feel better after
that part. Crying. It happens. You may feel worse.
I think a lot of times people think, well, if I just cry it out, I'll feel better. No. Sometimes crying does not make you feel better, but it still needs to happen.
Because your body has to release that. It's your coping mechanism for your body.
Right. Yeah, your body is telling you
need to do
something needs to happen, and you need to let it happen. With every like, your body is a powerful thing. Your body is like a computer.
It is.
It tells you everything that you need to know. And a lot of times we deny ourselves that knowledge. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Like, your body will tell you when it's in pain.
Yep.
When it's in stress.
Mm-hmm. When you need to sleep.
Right. When you should be fearful.
Yes. The fight or flight.
There's a lot of things that we need to listen to and be in tune with our body. Mm-hmm. And so crying is one of those things that your body is telling you need to do. Mm-hmm. And just do it. And yeah, you might not feel better afterwards, but you had to get that out.
Yeah.
You can journal your raw and authentic thoughts. Mm-hmm. A lot of us do journaling. I know a lot of people have journals.
I have journals for years.
Me too. I start, and every time I see a new one,
oh, girl, me too. You know how many new journals I got?
About it, girl. Oh, let me buy
it. Oh, it's pretty, and it's still sitting here. I'm looking at one right now in my office.
Yes, you have to do that.
Yeah.
Journaling and understand that sometimes journaling doesn't have to be a daily thing, and sometimes journaling doesn't have to be like, dear diary, today I went to. Journaling can just be, I need to just dump all the thoughts I have in my head on a piece of paper.
Right.
And it may not be coherent, but it's something that had to get out.
Right.
You know, mm-hmm. You could do a haiku.
Hey, there you go. Haiku it out.
Right.
Or what is the other? Limerick? Is that the other one?
Yes. Do something.
Right.
Just get it out.
Right.
Writing sometimes is also very therapeutic.
Yeah.
For people
mm-hmm.
who can't really process their emotions, it's too much in their
mm-hmm.
head, so they have to put it down on paper for it all to make sense.
Yeah.
Build trust in yourself, and this is hard. A lot of us don't trust ourselves. Because internal vulnerability is a struggle.
Yes.
Let me give you an example. I was at this point with therapy, right? Where my therapist is like, why is it so hard for you to get to this next step? Mm-hmm. Like, what is going on internally that is causing you to be hesitant to do this?
Right.
And you have to figure that out. And I like burst out with tears. I was like, because I don't trust myself. I make these decisions and it's always wrong. I don't trust any decision that I make. Are you happy now? That's what it is. I don't trust myself. And she just looked at me and I was like, oh.
Oh. I just answered my own question.
Oh, so you're telling me all I have to do is just trust and have faith in the decision that I make and I will be okay. Gotcha. Because I was like really didn't want to make any decisions because I was fearful. Because I said, well, every decision I've made has led me to this fucked up place.
Right.
Right? And I don't want to make any more decisions. I'll just let life. I was literally on this, like, I'm just going to let life happen.
Right. It's just going to happen to me.
Yeah.
Go with the flow.
She's like, well, how does that look? I was like, I'm just not going to make decisions. She's like, Zarifa, but you have to make. No, I don't. Yes, you do. No, I don't.
I don't.
Yeah, she's like,
I'm on strike.
But you do.
That's my decision.
Like, well, how do you get
to do nothing?
Yeah, she's like, well, how do you get dressed in the morning? I was like, well, I can make those kind of decisions. She's like, yeah, but you're saying like you're just. She's like, are you understanding? Like, so you can make decisions about what to eat. Yeah, I guess. Like, mm-hmm. Or I'll just drive. I just didn't want to participate in life. That's pretty much what it was.
Right.
I just wanted.
But that's good that you knew that though, because some people just do that and don't even realize that they're just
no.
a gray rock existing.
Yeah. And that's how I was. I was like, I don't want to make any decisions. Every decision I made led me here, so fuck that. I don't want to do it.
Right.
So this person is asking you to decide if you want them in your. Oh well, I'm not making that decision.
Right.
I'll let them make that decision
I'm on strike.
for me. What?
Mm-hmm. And then life happens to you, and then you're like, oh shit. Maybe I shouldn't have done that.
Right. So, you have to trust yourself, and it takes time. You have to set small, achievable goals. Avoid making promises to yourself that will be difficult, but you need to show up for yourself, honor your boundaries, but prioritize your needs.
Yes.
Okay? That's how you build some trust within yourself. So that's yourself. So now we're talking about relationships. Let's make the shift. So how are you vulnerable in a relationship? And this is romantic or otherwise.
Right.
I don't like to always just focus on your romantic relationships, because those are not the only relationships that we have. And they're not always the most, this is controversial for somebody like me to say, but they're not always the most important, depending on what part, where you are in your journey.
Agreed.
Let's just say that.
Agreed. Because that may be the source of the
journey.
issue.
It could be, right.
Just saying. You gotta be realistic, y'all.
It could be. You have to, right. So, being vulnerable in a relationship is letting your guard down to connect in a raw and open manner. And this is what I'm saying, like going back to that story I was saying, in that moment, in that relationship, I was vulnerable, right? And I put my heart on I put what I felt was my heart on the line, right? But knowing that it could have ended in heartache. It could have, and it did, to have someone that you thought care about you say some shit like that. That was very heartbreaking and hurtful. But guess what? It still required you to be the most authentic you that you could be. And so you can't beat yourself up about that. Right? You could do that in friendships. If you come to your friend and you're telling your friend, hey friend, I am struggling financially, and you may not even be asking them for help. You just may be wanting to talk to them. Like, I'm really struggling financially. And then they come at you, well, that's what you get. Nobody told you go out here, go to this club, this party. Ain't nobody tell you do this, do that, do that. Then it's just like, oh.
Right. And now you're not going to have that conversation ever again.
Right. But that person's not safe just because it may be projection.
Right.
Right. So now I can still be vulnerable. I just can't be vulnerable with
Correct.
that person.
In a different way.
Right. I feel like one of the foundations of a successful relationship is vulnerability. Because if I can't be vulnerable with you, then where's the intimacy? Because the intimacy and vulnerability kind of go hand in hand.
And intimacy is not sex all the time, y'all.
No, it's not.
I think people have a whole misconception. That's another thing we could talk about, what people's perception of intimacy actually is, and what people think it is, and what it actually looks like. You know, and that comes into play, like you said, hand in hand with the vulnerability aspect. You have to be vulnerable to be intimate.
You have to, because if you're not, then how can you
connect? Which is part of being vulnerable, is to be able to open yourself up to connections. Positive connections. Let me clarify that.
Exactly. So, and I think a lot of times, and we need to talk about this at some point, a lot of times people can't be vulnerable in relationships because of their ego.
Pride.
Their ego is a driving factor in the ego is, when it comes to the demise of a relationship, ego is front and center, because from the ego will sprout, the spokes go to all different types of things, right? The ego is the wheel, and then the other issues are the spokes, right? You have finances. Well, if you trace it back, it'll go back to the ego, because somebody felt like, I don't have to discuss this with you, right? Cheating. My ego needed to be stroked, and therefore I went and did X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of, the ego is the center of a lot of problems, right?
So true.
So if you can't be vulnerable in your relationship, maybe you need to look at your ego, because that might be what needs to be checked, right? But how can you be more vulnerable in a relationship outside of checking your ego? You can be a better listener,
right?
Do you need advice, or do you need me just to listen?
We
talked about this before.
Yes. What hat are you wearing in that conversation?
Right. If somebody's in your space and they're coming to you to be vulnerable, you need to check yourself and say, whoa, before I even respond, I need to know, are you coming to me just to vent, or do you want some advice? I just need to vent. Okay. And now you understand
and hear differently
the position Exactly. Check-in, regular check-ins with your partner. Hey, I do this all the time with my husband. Hey, we good? Where are we? Like, is this a problem? Or, but you have to do that. And that does require vulnerability because you may hear some shit that you don't want to hear.
Hello. And that person may hear some stuff too, but
hello. I mean, those are facts. Yeah. But that still requires a level of vulnerability that a lot of people don't want to take, because a lot of people don't want to hear that their shit stinks. Nobody wants to be told that their shit stinks.
Not at all.
Not
at all.
So, and then, just get outside of your comfort zone, check in with yourself, engage in some self-soothing, and then weave more moments of vulnerability through your day.
For sure. So, like we've talked about, Zarifa kind of touched upon when we were talking about earlier about how certain communities are disproportionately targeted or focused upon on multiple levels. This definitely holds true within the Black community, because oftentimes we are not afforded the opportunity to be vulnerable. And what I'm about to say, some folks may find and take issue with about white fragility. This is not a black or white thing, but the issue that we're talking about with vulnerability comes under the umbrella of how some of our Caucasian brothers and sisters may perceive certain things and how they are treated versus how we are treated, and where that comes into play with how we as a Black community can be vulnerable. It's a luxury for us. There's certain things that we just can't say, or we do say and people feel some type of way about it because they're offended. And oftentimes that is present in some aspects or some portions of the white community. And some of them have felt like something that may happen to us. For instance, if we're walking through the store and someone's following us, a white person may be like, oh no, they're just checking on you and seeing if you need help. And I'm like, no, it's not the same thing. It's because I'm Black. And then they're like, oh, how can you say that? And, they get offended, and all white people are not like that. And they just miss the whole point of the historical precedent that has been set for that, for us not to be able to just be free and vulnerable in our shopping life, just for an example, right? And we're not taught to be vulnerable because we can't afford to be, because we always have to be on the defense for everything.
Luxury, because vulnerability in the Black community is a luxury. is a luxury that we can't afford
at all. We can't. It's just not our reality. You think about the Black girl magic, strong Black woman, and we've talked about this. If it's a strong Black woman, facade that we're always putting out, where does that come into being vulnerable? If everybody says that you're a strong Black woman, you're a strong Black woman. Well, how about I don't want to be a strong Black woman? What if I want to be a vulnerable Black woman? That's never been on the docket for us to even talk about. It's just, and if we do say we're vulnerable, and then folks look at us like we're crazy, and then we're saying we're vulnerable because we have to carry the weight of the world literally on our backs, from soup to nuts. There's stuff as Black women that we have to carry, so we don't get the opportunity to be vulnerable because we have everybody else's burdens.
Every time I've taken the opportunity to be vulnerable in the workplace specifically, or this is external from relationships, every time I've taken the opportunity to be vulnerable to a community outside of our own, I've always gotten bitten. Every single time. There's never been a time that I haven't.
Right.
I've gotten bitten and burnt.
Every time. And that is a lot of I'm not going to say across the board because some Black women may not experience this, but there's a large percentage of us that have that happen to us, and especially in the workplace sometimes.
Right. And then you're told, well, why would you do that? Then that's why you need to be this in the workplace. But then when you put on that facade, then it's just like,
you're the angry Black woman and you're aggressive. You're an angry
Black woman, or you're aggressive, or you
take things too personally. And
exactly. There's just too much this and that. And it's just like, case in point. And this is probably going to be a little longer of an episode than we normally are. One, because our producer's not here, so she can't. She can't check.
Who gonna check, baby?
But then this is a very hardy topic.
Yeah.
So recently I had and I'm trying to make the story as short as possible. Recently, I told you all, I changed positions a while ago. I went from a supervisor to just an employee. Mm-hmm. In the position that I'm in now, because I was afforded the ability to telework 80% of the time, even prior to the pandemic, it put me in a position where I would hotel, right, in terms of my workspace. But we were, me and the person that shared the workspace, we were given a designated work area. Mm-hmm. This is going to be your work area. Great. Pandemic hits, that went out the window. As we get closer and closer to them opening back up the building, they hired contractors to come in, and the contractors sat in the seat that was designated for me and my colleague. And we all had, again, me and my colleague shared this space, so we already had all our work stuff there. Mm-hmm. We hadn't had the chance to really put it in order because the pandemic hit. Right. We literally got this space and then the pandemic hit. So we came back in and we were told, well, the contractors that are sitting there, we're going to give you this other shared workspace. Mm-hmm. And we were like, cool. Well, I was recently told that a new contractor came in, and this individual didn't like the fact that our stuff was there. Mind you, this is a contractor, not a permanent employee. And someone took the liberty to move my stuff from that workspace and put it into their office without first notifying me. Mm-hmm. The person is a supervisor, so they should know better. You're not supposed to touch employees.
No.
I know that as a supervisor. And two, it wasn't that serious. All you had to do was contact me, the colleague, and we could have said, okay, we'll be in X, Y, Z.
Right.
And we'll move.
But you're supposed to let people know.
Right. If I was of another color, I could have just sent the email about how upset I was about the situation and let it be done.
Yep.
The fact that I'm Black, I had to talk to 3 people to help me cultivate an email to talk about something that's across the board wrong.
Yep.
But I had to have somebody cultivate this email for me because I couldn't be seen as too aggressive.
Yep.
I couldn't be seen as this. I couldn't be seen as that. I couldn't be seen as that. So even in the vulnerability of telling somebody that they hurt my feelings, mm-hmm. I had to be mindful that it could be perceived as threatening or authoritative or me being a bitch.
Yep.
When literally I'm just telling you, don't touch my shit.
Hello.
Without talking to me first.
And then get tagged as the angry Black woman, and now you got a rep. If you would have come at it like a regular person saying this is not appropriate.
Exactly. And everybody said, oh, you're 100% right. That was fucked up. They should mm-hmm. have told you that this, you don't just move and then put it in an office that you can't get into. It was just a nightmare. So I had to cultivate this email. And I'm like, I couldn't just send it out.
Right.
Like, this is what we're talking about when we say, even us being vulnerable and expressing ourselves.
We can't.
We can't. We can't just say this is how I feel and that be the end of it. I had to literally, it took 2 days before I could send this email because of the fact that I had to make sure that what I was saying wasn't coming across any other way than what I
So that we wouldn't hurt anybody else's feelings that was looking to be offended. And that's where we're talking about some of the fragility of other cultures and other races comes into play because that is not their reality. Right. And we have to do all of this stuff just to convey something that they could send an email about to the manager.
Right.
To the manager. And we can't, we don't have that luxury because the blowback on us is 10 times worse than what it would be on someone who is not Black.
Right.
So at least, and we're speaking from our experiences. We're not, generalizing. This is our reality and what we've had to deal with in our 40 plus years of being on this earth. So it is what it is. That's just that's our life, and then that also folds into, with us as being strong Black women or the angry Black woman, it also has a counter situation for our Black men or Black boy joy. And what if you have a young Black man, a young Black boy, or a young man, and they always have to be tough. They can't even be vulnerable because there's negative backlash if they cry, if they don't man up, if they don't, if you soft, and they don't have the opportunity in society to be vulnerable either, but in a different way because they're seen as a threat. and not in a way that we're seen as a threat. But because they're seen as a threat, that is not an option that they really can step into at all. And it's really, and it's unfortunate because a lot of black men and young black men end up having to have to receive what's considered tough love rather than regular love, which stunts their growth further in life and learning how to convey that or bestow that upon the women in their life, the sons and daughters in their lives, because they've been stunted because of how society sees them. And it's a vicious cycle that happens all the time. It teaches them that they have to bottle up their emotions, suppress their feelings, and remain stoic in the state of vulnerability. Like, don't be a punk, don't be crying, you got man, all that other stuff. And it's counterproductive and extremely harmful to our black men. And then it translates into relationships where they end up being hyper masculine, which is not, and they may not mentally be equipped to be what hyper masculine even is in their thought process, and then sometimes they end up crying in solitude. This is why the suicide rate for black men is higher than that of black women, because they do not have an outlet within, and they're not, and we're all guilty of it in the same breath, in the same way that we say we want a strong black woman. And then if she's not, like, well, what's wrong with, she's supposed to be the backbone. But if we have a strong black man and he shows some vulnerability, sometimes as women, we're like, well, he a punk. Why? He can't man up. So we're just as guilty as their counterparts, and that's because of what society has trained us to do. And then the black fathers, unfortunately, have to disregard that vulnerability due to a black man's presence in white America. They're not allowed. Look at all the individuals of our black men and young men that have been gunned down by police because they were being vulnerable, being children, playing with guns, playing cops and robbers, or whatever it is they're doing, playing with a BB gun. That a white counterpart, they can do that and be free and run around and not worry about getting shot down.
You can't even drive.
Thank you. You can't take a walk. You can't drive. You can't jog. You can't go to the grocery store. Can't go to church.
You can be like Philando, right?
Yes, Castile.
This man was in his car,
minding his business,
pulled over, minding his business, was told the cop, "Yeah, I have a gun and I have a license to carry. Here it is," and still got shot.
Yes,
you can't even exist in this country,
right? Because as a black man, that is so much. You're seen as so much of a threat.
You can't even have a mental health crisis.
Oh, yes, that.
I had to. I will say this one. I had to get something. Oh, I was getting my nails. I was getting my nails done, and I was about to get my nails done, and I was like, let me look for some nail inspiration. And I scrolled, and I stopped because I was like, see, this is the problem. And I saw a video of cops gunning down a man who was having a mental health crisis on the side of the road, and they were called and were told he's having a mental health crisis, and they still shot this man.
That has happened so many times.
You can't even be vulnerable in your mental health crisis. You understand?
That is what we mean. Like the vulnerability in the black community is not it is a luxury. It is a life and death situation for us as black people to be vulnerable. That is not the reality for a lot of the rest of the world.
No. And I try really hard to not parent my child the way that I was parented. Not to say that the way that I was parented was wrong. It's just that the tools that we have at our disposal now, our parents didn't have at their disposal. And what I mean is like therapy.
Yeah. Talking about your business, even though you're not supposed to talk about your business, but ain't nobody gonna know but you and the therapist.
Right. Or just like other tools that we just haven't had more access to healthcare that our parents didn't have. Not to say that our access to healthcare is much better, but it is a different access that we have. And so I try not to parent my daughter the way that I was parented. And also in the sense that I want her to understand that her vulnerability isn't a weakness, but I'm also like, if she cries, I'm like, I have to stop myself from saying, stop crying. What are you crying for? You're not crying about anything. Like, she is crying for something.
Right.
And in that moment, she's being vulnerable by showing me her emotions over the fact that she's upset about something, regardless of how trivial in that moment I may think it is. I have to take my judgment out of it and put myself into her shoes. She's obviously upset about something.
Right.
What are you upset about? Let's talk about what it is that you're upset about. And generally when I do that, she'll stop crying. But let's talk about what it is that you're upset about. This morning, she had a whole meltdown. She wanted to watch TV. I said, sure, but you have to clean up the mess that you made. I don't want to clean up my mess. Then you don't want to watch TV.
Mm-hmm.
And she just started bawling. And in that moment, I was like, girl, stop.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you crying? You're crying for nothing. But I told her, I said, listen, let's unpack this here. What are you crying about? I'm crying because I want to watch TV. Did mommy say you can't watch TV? No. What did mommy say? Mommy said I have to clean up before I watch TV. Okay, so then it's just that simple.
All right.
So I'm going to let you cry, and then you'll figure out that this is simple. You can resolve this issue quickly if you just do what I said first.
Mm-hmm.
And she cried, 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 and she cried. She cried for like 15 minutes. And then she came to me. She's like, Mom, I want to apologize. I said, what do you want to apologize for? She said, just for not listening. She's like, I'm going to go clean up my stuff now. Problem solved.
Right.
No yelling. You know what I'm saying? I didn't have to put her in timeout.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to I don't spank her. I don't, so I didn't have to put my hands on her.
Mm-hmm.
Like this, hey, if that's how you choose to raise your child, I ain't
right.
No shade. That's just not how I choose to raise her. And she was fine.
Mm-hmm.
She was allowed to express her emotions. She was allowed to be vulnerable in that moment. She got over it, and we're both good.
Right.
But we also have to understand that while we're parenting our children that way, we also have to teach them the reality that sometimes being vulnerable in the outside world isn't going to give you the reaction that you're going to get at home.
Right.
And you have to be prepared for that. I'm not telling you not to be vulnerable. I'm telling you to understand that there is a different set
right.
of consequences and reactions sometimes when you're vulnerable outside of these four walls.
Right. Exactly. And that goes into what vulnerability is not.
Right. And vulnerability is not a tactic. You have to understand that some people use vulnerability as a way to get them to view them in a certain way. You ever hear white women tears? That's white women using their tears as a way to get people to see them in a certain way, or to get them to do something that they want them to do.
The Emmett Till situation,
not a tactic.
Case in point.
Oh, that is one of the things that triggered me as well. I said, I gotta shut this down.
Yeah,
that situation is some bullshit.
And that is a prime example of white women tears. Yes. And that vulnerability that got that young man killed. That probably
is the epitome of
the
that.
Precipice of it.
Yes.
Because
the beginning. Genuine vulnerability is about what you do. It's not about what you do. It's all about why you're doing it. So if the intention behind your behavior is something other than authentic, then you're using your vulnerability as a tactic. I'm going to try to say that I'm going to use my vulnerability. Like I was telling you when we were first talking about this post, how we were first talking about this topic, how, people like to post things for a reaction.
Right.
Like,
yes, clickbait. They want to be their own clickbait.
I'm going to tell you that I'm broke so that you can start feeling sorry for me and maybe try to give me money. Ooh, excuse me. I apologize for you. Sometimes people use it as a tactic to get people to sleep with them, to give them money, to get people to like them. And that is when vulnerability goes wrong. So you always have to look at what the motivation is. If you even have to think about what your motivation is for being vulnerable in that moment, you don't need to be vulnerable, because vulnerable is authentic.
Yes,
it just comes.
It just happens.
It just happens.
It's not a manipulation tactic or technique, rather.
Exactly. But if you find yourself in that situation where you are thinking about it, are you using that vulnerability as a crutch? Are you using it as a weapon? A lot of people use vulnerability as a weapon. Are you using it as a sense of entitlement?
Yeah.
Right? Are you using it to manipulate others to get sympathy? A lot of people do that, especially on Facebook. Ooh. Lord Jesus, a lot of y'all do that, and I don't like it. you know, are you trying to just do things that will cause people to manipulate?
Yeah.
Are you using it as manipulation? Right. If you feel vulnerable enough to share, right,
Mm-hmm.
then let that be what it is, and that's
it. Yeah. No ulterior motive.
Right. And if something comes from it, fine.
Mm-hmm.
But also understand that sometimes, like we said, you're not going to always get the reaction that you're thinking you're
Correct.
going to get. And that should be okay, but that should not stunt you from continuing to be vulnerable in other situations.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I thought I was about to burp. So, with all these things, that we've talked about and how it can cause angst and worry and just feeling like this is why I don't want to be vulnerable with anybody about anything at any time, place going forward. But there are ways we can embrace vulnerability in a positive way. Just try to be genuine and authentic. The one thing I will say, some people don't know who their authentic self is. So they don't know what that is. So like when they're case in point, when they're posting on Facebook or Instagram, do it for the gram, do it for a post. And that is not who they are, but that's who they're pretending to be. So when they try to be themselves, they don't even know what that is. And so it does come off as being manipulative, and that maybe because they really don't know, they don't have a starting point. They don't have an anchor to understand what is being manipulative, or am I really just trying to get, or am I truly getting attention because I need it, but I'm not seeing it as being manipulative because you haven't connected those two. But as someone on the outside is looking like, why are you doing that? Or are you trying to position yourself in that way? But they don't see it because they don't know where they are with themselves. Discerning how to be vulnerable, if possible, based on your situations. We talked about that already. Who you feel you can you can expose yourself to. Vulnerability comes with trust and honesty. And that's being honest with yourself, honest with the person you're being vulnerable with. And basically, if you're trying to be honest with that person and they're not in a space, like Zarifa said, I think that's one of the big takeaways. You being vulnerable is not contingent upon someone else's reaction to your vulnerability. That should not take away your desire or want or need to be vulnerable, but also understand that there's a level of trust when someone comes to you, that someone has imparted on you to be honest with you so that they can be vulnerable. So you have to be mindful, try to be mindful as best as possible, that if someone is coming to you and they're in a vulnerable space, they're trusting you enough to be honest with you so that they can continue the path to vulnerability. And that's key to how you develop any relationship, friendship, works, relationships, romantic relationships, any of those types of business relationships. There still has to become, all those things come into play, because stuff does not move forward, whether it's vulnerability, faking vulnerability, or actual authentic vulnerability. It still comes into play for some people on how they get to where they need to go or where they think they want to go. And compassion is huge. That goes with being mindful of how people are coming to you and presenting themselves, because folks really need that safe space, that landing pad. And just try to be mindful when folks are coming to you, because you may be that person for them in that moment, but also let them know you may not be in a place to receive it and help them. And hopefully that person is in a space to understand that,
Right.
So,
well, I think this was a very good conversation. I think this is definitely a conversation that you all can carry on with your friends and your family, or with yourself, to kind of break down, like, ooh, am I vulnerable enough? Am I too vulnerable? Have I not given people the space to feel safe and vulnerable with
holding
me?
space?
It's definitely a good conversation to continue. Unfortunately, we can't.
Right.
So we are going to take a quick break and come back with the last sip of the tea with me. And we're back. This is the last sip of tea with your Hood Dalai Lama. I am your Hood Dalai Lama. vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Vulnerability is not a weakness. It is our greatest measure of courage. And that is attributed to someone that we talk about a lot. We bring forth a lot through our conversations. Bryn Brown. She has a lot of good TED Talks, a lot. She has a lot of knowledge, a lot of jewels, a lot of gems. So yeah, definitely somebody good to quote here on this good Sunday.
Yes.
And that is it for me. This is the Dalai Lama signing out.
So thank you all for joining us this week on Sippin' Tea with Nat and Z. As you know, you can follow us on Instagram at sippintea_NatandZ_pod and on Facebook at Sippin' Tea Nat and Z to get information on upcoming podcasts, topic, guests, and news. Thanks for listening, and catch us on the next episode where we take a trip down memory lane. Y'all have a good week. Be well.